Wyoming Territory. 1883, the wind hit hard across the high plains near Rawlins, tearing at the lace veil hanging limp in her hands as the stagecoach vanished in a trail of dust, taking her groom with it. Adaline Lark stood alone at the edge of the station platform, her wedding dress caked with travel dust, her fingers trembling around the yellowed paper that had once promised a future. Her groom, Charles, had taken one look at her when she stepped off the coach, hair mussed from the ride, face pinked from windburn, and turned away without a word. No explanation, no apology, just walked off, saddled his horse, and rode east. The station master, a man too used to seeing folks leave broken, offered her a half-hearted "I'm sorry." A woman in a bonnet whispered behind her hand. Adaline stood straighter, refusing to cry, even as her heart cracked wide open in her chest. She had sold everything back in Kansas City. There was no home to return to. She was cast away by her groom without mercy. "You all right, miss?" The voice came from behind her, quiet but firm. She turned and met the eyes of a man leaning against the post rail, hat tipped back just enough to show the sunburnt line across his forehead. His shirt was worn, the cuffs fraying, and his boots were dusty from days on the trail. But his eyes, gray like storm clouds over the prairie, held something steady, kind even. "I will be," she said, though she was not sure she believed it. He nodded once and stepped forward. "Name's Merritt Boone. I run cattle west of here." Adaline blinked at him. "Why are you talking to me?" "Because I saw what he did, and I do not think any decent man rides away from a woman like that." Her throat tightened, and she looked away before the tears could rise. She hated how bare she felt, stripped not just of plans but of dignity. "I have no money," she said. "I am not offering charity," Merritt replied. "I am offering shelter. You look like you need a place to sit down, maybe breathe for a while. My ranch is 2 hours west by wagon. You come or you stay. But I am not leaving you here without a choice." She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of mockery. There was none. Adaline hesitated, then nodded once. "All right." Merritt helped her up into the wagon, his hand steady beneath her elbow. They rode in silence for a while, the sun dipping low behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. The road was rough, but he drove careful, like he knew how to handle both horses and silence. His ranch sat in a wide valley framed by cottonwoods and thick grass. A barn leaned slightly to one side, and a dog barked once from the porch. He helped her down and led her inside the low cabin with its plank walls and stone hearth. It was simple, but clean. "You can take the bedroom," he said. "I will sleep out here by the fire." "I do not want to put you out," she said. "You did not ask to be put in this place either," he replied. She stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "If you stay for a few days, we can figure out what you want from there. I will not ask questions you do not want to answer." Adaline stepped forward. "Why are you being kind to me?" He looked at her then, really looked. "Because someone else should have been, and they failed you." She could not speak. She just nodded and went into the room, shutting the door behind her before she let the tears fall. 2 days passed. Adaline helped where she could, sweeping out the barn, feeding the chickens, boiling water for the wash. She moved through the quiet rhythm of the place like she was trying to remember how to be useful again. Merritt never hovered. He just worked beside her, respectful and steady, like the land he lived on. By the 5th morning, she was chopping vegetables when he came in with a dusty envelope in hand. "Mail came through the station," he said. "This one has your name." She opened it with shaking fingers. It was from her older sister in Kansas City, brief, formal, and final. Their father had died 6 months back, and with no dowry left, the family had little interest in welcoming her home. She was on her own. She folded the letter and set it down. "Well," she said, voice brittle, "that settles that." Merritt stepped closer. "I am not going to tell you what to do, but if you wanted to stay, I would not mind." She looked up at him. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because I like having you here," her breath caught. "You hardly know me. I know what kind of woman you are. I see it in how you hold yourself. You lost everything, and you still got up this morning, tied your hair back, and made stew. That tells me more than a lifetime of talking could." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers curled around hers, calloused and warm. "I do not want to be someone's burden," she said. "You are not," he said simply. "But if you stay, I would want it to be proper." She blinked. "Proper? I could give you my name," he said, "if you wanted it." The room went still, the only sound the low crackle from the stove. "I do not want to marry out of pity," she whispered. He met her eyes. "It is not pity, it is something else. Something I would not mind having grow." Adaline's hand trembled in his, but she did not pull away. "I will think on it," she said. He nodded. "That is fair." That night, she sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt, watching the stars blink alive above the trees. Merritt came out after supper and sat nearby, not too close. "I was not supposed to end up here," she said. "I was supposed to be someone's wife, have a family." "You still can," he said. She looked over at him. "You would want that, with me." He turned toward her, his face serious. "I would not offer something I did not mean." Her eyes searched his, and slowly, something inside her began to settle. For the first time in days, she felt like her feet were touching solid ground. "I think I would like that," she said quietly. He nodded once, and she saw the smallest smile break across his face. They sat in silence after that, both staring out at the darkening sky. But this time, the quiet felt different, warmer, like something beginning. And Adaline knew, deep down, that maybe this was how new lives started, not with grand promises, but with quiet steadiness, and a man who meant what he said. The morning sun hung low behind the hills, casting long blue shadows across the pasture as Merritt led the team out to the edge of the south fence. Adaline stood near the wooden gate, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, with a coil of wire in her arms and her hair tucked beneath a scarf. The wind tugged at the hem of her skirt, dry and cold, but she didn't flinch. Her hands were already calloused from work. "You ever patched fence before?" Merritt asked, glancing at her as he set the post auger down. "No," she said, lifting the wire onto the ground beside him. "But I watched my father mend a chicken coop once. I figure it can't be too different." Merritt chuckled softly and picked up the post-hole digger. "Not too far off. We'll start at the corner. That's where the steers keep pressing through." Adaline followed him, boots sinking slightly into the softened ground where a spring runoff had soaked through. She didn't ask questions. She watched how he worked, how he measured distance between posts with a length of twine, how he used his boot heel to test the soil's hold. When he handed her the hammer, she didn't hesitate. By mid-morning, they'd set 3 new posts and strung new wire. Adaline's arms ached from swinging the mallet, but she didn't complain. Merritt wiped his forehead with his sleeve and reached for the canteen. "You work like you've been doing it your whole life," he said, offering it to her. "I'm not afraid of a little dirt," she replied, taking a sip and handing it back. He nodded once, then looked out toward the grazing cattle. "There's a few pregnant heifers in that lot. Should calve before the month's out." Adaline followed his gaze. "Do you have a midwife for them?" "I do it myself, mostly," he said. "Helped my sister's mule birth twins once. Figured if I could manage that, I could manage just about anything." She smiled without thinking, then let it fade. "Do you see your sister often?" "Not anymore." He turned slightly. "She married a man out near Wind River. We write, but she's got her own life now." Adaline crouched near the fence line, pulling burrs from her skirt. I used to think family was a net, something that would catch you if you fell. What do you think now? She stood and brushed off her hands. I think some nets aren't made to hold the weight. Merritt didn't reply, but his presence beside her felt like an answer. They returned to the cabin by late afternoon, their shadows stretching long across the yard. The dog waited by the stoop, tail thumping once as they passed. Inside, the hearth still held the morning's warmth. Adaline loosened her scarf, then moved to the basin to wash the dust from her hands. Merritt leaned against the doorframe, watching her. I was thinking, he said after a moment, if you wanted to go into town next week, we could have the preacher meet us. She turned slowly, drying her hands on her apron. You still want that? I do. Even after seeing me sweat and swear over barbed wire, he smiled faintly. Especially after that, she looked down at her hands. I don't have a dress. I figure that doesn't matter. The room was quiet for a moment, then she stepped closer. I want it to be real, she said, her voice steady. Not just something we do to make things easier. It will be, he said. If you choose it. Adaline met his eyes. Then I choose it. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. His fingers closed around hers, solid and warm, and she felt something shift deep inside her. Not a fire, but a root, something strong and growing. Later, she stood by the window as dusk settled across the land. The cottonwoods whispered in the wind, and the barn roof caught the last of the light. Merritt stepped up behind her, close but not too close. We'll have to ride in early, he said. It's a long way to the church. She nodded. I'll be ready. He looked out with her, silent for a while, then he said, It won't be fancy, just us and maybe the station master if we need a witness. I don't need fancy, she replied. I just need true. He turned to her then, his expression unreadable in the fading light. You'll have that. She didn't look away, and in the quiet that followed, something settled between them, not rushed, not stolen, but earned. Like the land itself had made space for them and they had stepped into it, side by side. The church sat at the far end of Rawlins, tucked along the bend of a dry creek that only ran in spring. Its whitewashed boards were weather-worn, and the bell tower leaned a little to the west. But the stained glass in the front window caught morning light in a way that made it look like the place was holding its breath. Adaline stood in the rear room beside a cracked mirror, smoothing the sleeves of a borrowed dress. It was pale blue cotton, with hand-mended seams, and had belonged to the preacher's wife back when she was still alive. The fit was close in the shoulders, looser around the waist. Adaline hadn't worn color in years. She touched the fabric at her hip, then let her hand fall. Outside the door, bootsteps creaked across the floorboards. She heard quiet voices, Merritt's low murmur, the preacher's quiet reply. She breathed in through her nose and looked once more at her reflection. No veil, no bouquet, no guests, but she wasn't shaking. She stepped into the chapel as the bell tolled once. Merritt turned toward her. He wore a dark vest and clean shirt, his collar brushed stiff. His hair was damp from washing, combed back, and his jaw had been freshly scraped with a straight razor. He didn't smile. He just watched her walk toward him like a man seeing something he never expected to find. The preacher cleared his throat. We'll begin. The service was brief. No hymns, no pews filled with kin, just the words and the silence between them. When the time came, Merritt spoke first. I give you my name because I mean to share what I have, land, time, work, whatever's left of me with you. Adaline held his gaze. I take your name because I choose this life, this place, this work, and you. The vows were spoken with no flourish, but when Merritt took her hand in his thumb brushed the back of hers once, and it steadied something inside her. The preacher's voice faded behind the moment. You are husband and wife, he said. God keep you. Afterward, they stepped into the sunlight without fanfare. The wind had eased, and overhead, a red-tailed hawk circled on a current. Merritt tied their horses near the fence and helped her into the saddle. They rode west, side by side, dust lifting around their boots. At the ranch, the dog barked once and gave a slow wag of the tail before settling back down. Merritt opened the door for her, and the cabin smelled faintly of cedar from the firewood he'd stacked earlier that week. On the table sat a tin plate covered with cloth, 2 slices of dried apple pie, left by the preacher's daughter who hadn't stayed for the ceremony. Merritt poured 2 mugs of coffee from the kettle. "I didn't know what you'd want for a wedding day." "This," Adaline said, taking the cup. "This is enough." They ate at the table with the windows open, the breeze stirring the curtains. Merritt said little, but his gaze lingered on her in a way that made her chest ache, not from hurt, but from the unfamiliar weight of being seen. After the dishes were cleared, Adaline stepped outside to the small garden plot that had begun to take root under the warming sun. She knelt and pressed her hands to the soil, breaking it with care, pulling the first weeds. Merritt joined her after a while, kneeling beside her without a word. He reached for the trowel and they worked in tandem, rows forming between them. The quiet stretched, comfortable and full. "Did you always want this?" she asked after a while. He looked out over the land. "I wanted space to breathe. I didn't think I'd have someone to share it with. You do now." He pressed his hands into the earth. "I know." That night they sat close by the hearth, the fire casting gold across the walls. Adaline rested her head against Merritt's shoulder, her body tired from the day's ride, the vows, the quiet labor. He didn't move, just let her lean. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said softly. "You are," he answered. In the hush that followed, she reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. His thumb brushed her knuckles once, then stilled. The fire burned low, and the wind whispered outside, but inside the cabin, there was only warmth and the slow, steady rhythm of 2 people beginning a life not promised, but chosen. The barn roof clattered soft under the wind as April deepened. Snow still clung to the north-facing slopes, but the pasture had turned a thin, hopeful green. At midday, Merritt returned from checking the west troughs, his coat damp from creek spray. He found Adaline kneeling near the shed, brushing straw from an old cradle. He leaned his forearm against the post, watching her for a moment. "That from the loft?" he asked. She stood, brushing her skirt. "It was under tarps beside a broken wheelbarrow. One rocker's cracked." Merritt glanced at the cradle, then at her. "You wanting it fixed?" "I think I will, yes." He didn't ask anything more, just stepped forward and ran his fingers along the splintering curve. "I've got hickory in the stack. I can match the wood close enough." She nodded, fingers smoothing along the rim. "I can sew a lining once it's steady. Maybe quilt a blanket if we come across enough muslin. Won't take but a few days," he said. They stood together beside the cradle, the wind tugging at the corner of her shawl. She caught it with one hand, looked up at him. "I wasn't sure when I'd tell you," she said. "Didn't want it to feel like a burden." "It doesn't," he said. "Not a thing about you ever has." That night, after the chores were done and the lantern trimmed low, she sat near the hearth with a needle in hand, threading linen into long, even stitches. Merritt was at the table, sharpening the draw-knife. He looked up once, then again, setting down the blade. "You've been quiet," he said. She didn't stop sewing. "I've been trying to picture what kind of mother I'll be." He crossed to the hearth and lowered himself beside her. "What do you see?" She gave a small, thoughtful breath. "A woman who rises before first light, who knows how to mend small things, not just broken things, who teaches patience instead of fear. You'll be that." She turned to him, her eyes catching the firelight. "How do you know?" Merritt rested his hand against her knee, not heavy, just there. "Because I've seen how you tend what's yours. even when you weren't certain you were allowed to. Her throat worked once, but she didn't look away. "Do you think," she said, "you'll be like your father?" "I never knew him," Merritt said. "He died before I could remember his voice, but I think I'll be better than he was, if only because I've got you beside me." She set the cloth aside, leaned her shoulder gently into his. "That's all I've ever wanted." In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of the ranch shifted. Merritt cleared the north fence line with quieter steps. He started leaving the heavier buckets closer to the porch. Adaline grew slower in the mornings, but she still rose before the sun. She planted sweet peas near the kitchen window and began humming under her breath when she washed dishes, only stopping when she realized he could hear her. He never said a word when she did. One morning, he returned from the pasture with a bundle of wild sage and left it on the table without explanation. She found it while boiling water, lifted it to her face, and inhaled deeply. Later that day, she asked, "Why sage?" He shrugged, adjusting the tack on a saddle. "My sister used to hang it above her door when she was expecting, said it kept the bad out, or at least reminded her to hope." Adaline touched the leaves gently. "I like the smell of it, makes the room feel clean." He looked over at her. "You make the room feel like home." She let her hand fall, but her eyes stayed on him. "You mean that?" "I've never said anything I didn't." That evening, clouds rolled in low and heavy, streaked with iron gray. As the wind picked up, Adaline stepped onto the porch, one hand on her belly. Merritt joined her, slipping his coat over her shoulders without a word. She leaned into him lightly, their silhouettes drawn against the dim sky. "I've never seen a spring storm roll in like this," she said. "They come fast this high up," he replied. "But they pass fast too," she nodded, eyes on the horizon. "So do a lot of things." Merritt looked down at her, then out at the pasture. "Some things stay if you build them right." She turned her face up to his, wind catching the edge of her hair. "Have we?" He reached for her hand and placed it over his heart. "I think we have." And as the first drops fell, cold and clean, they stayed there on the porch together, not waiting for the storm to pass, but standing inside it, side by side. The foal came at the tail end of May, just as the cottonwoods unfurled their pale green leaves, and the creek behind the barn started running strong again. Merritt found the mare pacing at dawn, her sides heaving, and spent the better part of 2 hours coaxing the colt into the world with sweat across his brow, and both knees sunk deep in straw. When it was done, he stood back and let the mother nuzzle her young, the colt's legs still unsteady beneath it. Adaline watched from the stall door, her hands folded just under the curve of her belly. She didn't speak until the foal had latched and begun to drink. "You've a way with things when they're scared." Merritt dusted off his sleeves and straightened slowly. "They just need to know they're not alone." She stepped into the stall, careful in her walk now, and reached a hand toward the colt's damp flank. Its hide twitched beneath her fingers, but it didn't pull away. "You think he'll be strong?" "He's already got the will. That's the hardest part." They stood together a long while, the barn warm with breath and hay and the soft shuffle of hooves. When they returned to the cabin, Merritt lit the stove and pulled a small bundle from the cupboard. "What's that?" Adaline asked, setting her shawl aside. "Something I bartered off the tanner's wife last time I went to Rawlins. Thought you could use it." He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a pair of soft leather slippers, the stitching neat across the top. She picked one up, ran her thumb along the edge. "These are for after," he nodded. "For when you'll be walking the floor at night." Her mouth parted, but no words came. She set the slipper down and reached across the table, her hand finding his. "You think of everything." He shook his head once. "Just the things that matter." That evening they sat outside with the sun low behind the ridge, the air full of frog song and the distant yip of coyotes. Merritt carved slow strokes into a length of pine, shaping the last corner of the cradle's new rocker. Adaline sat beside him with her fingers curled around an embroidery hoop, threading small wildflowers into the muslin edge. She paused, needle lifted. "You ever miss the places you left behind?" He kept his eyes on the wood. "No, I was a boy when I left Missouri. Nothing there ever felt like mine. What about now?" "Now," he said, laying the knife down, "I wake up and know where I belong." She reached over, brushing a curl of wood from his lap. "I do too." The days stretched longer as June approached, and with them came the weight of waiting. Adaline moved slower, pausing often, one hand always absently resting just above her waist. Merritt took on more of the labor without word or fuss. He built a shade over the pump so she wouldn't stand too long in sun. He packed a birthing bundle with linens, boiled clean, and a jar of willow bark tincture just in case one night a thunderstorm rolled through, loud and sudden. Rain hammered the roof and lightning lit the windows pale as bone. Adaline woke with a start, breath uneven. Merritt sat up beside her. "It's just weather." She held still a moment, then turned toward him. "It's starting." He threw on his boots, lit the lantern, and moved with the calm that steadied her. She leaned against him as they walked to the other room, her grip tight around his arm. The hours came slow and hard, but he never left her side. He wiped her brow when sweat gathered and pressed cool cloths to her neck. When the pain crested, she gripped his hand so tight it left a bruise. He didn't flinch. Just after dawn, the cries broke clean through the hush. A child, red and strong, lunged, blinked into the world. Merritt wrapped the boy in a thin wool blanket and handed him to her with hands that trembled only a little. Adaline looked down at the tiny face, then up at him. "He's ours." Merritt nodded, something raw in his throat. "He is." They named him Elias after no one, just a name Adaline had once read in a story by oil lamp and never forgotten. The days that followed were slow and full. Adaline rested while Merritt kept the house, his boots soft on the floorboards. He carried Elias with practiced arms, humming tunelessly as he walked the room, careful never to wake her when sleep finally came. One afternoon, she found Merritt outside beneath the cottonwood, rocking the cradle with one foot and reading from a weathered book of Psalms, his voice low and steady. Elias blinked up at the branches, wide-eyed. "You always talk to him like he understands," she said, setting a basin of rinse water down nearby. "He might not yet," Merritt said, "but I figure the words'll settle in just the same." She stepped closer, watching the curve of his hand over their son's small chest, the way he moved without thought anymore, just instinct, just care. She laid her hand on his shoulder. "I never imagined it could feel like this." "Like what?" "Like peace." Merritt looked up at her. "It ain't what I imagined either." "It's better." That night, with the fire burned low and Elias asleep in the cradle Merritt built, Adaline curled beside her husband beneath the quilt she'd stitched during the waiting weeks. Her head rested against his chest and his arm came around her, palm warm against her back. "You still glad you stayed?" he asked quietly. She lifted her face to his, eyes steady. "Every morning I wake beside you, I fall deeper into knowing I did right." He leaned down and kissed her slowly, not with urgency, but with a tenderness that felt like the land itself, enduring, quiet, and certain. Outside, the wind moved through the tall grass, and the stars above the valley shone clear and wide across the Wyoming sky. Inside, 3 heartbeats moved in rhythm, close and warm. And in that little house at the edge of the frontier, where 2 lives once stood alone, a family had taken root deep, sure, and lasting.